Thank you all for coming today. You just got to notice that the session is being recorded. We also have captions available. So if you need captions, those are available under that More button, and then you can choose to include captions if that's useful for you. And welcome to our session today on They Don't Come to Office Hours, Strategies for Improving Our Connections with Students in and Out of the Classroom. My name is Matt Crate. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a teaching and learning specialist here at CTRL. And I'll let my co-facilitator introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Hannah Jardine. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also a teaching and learning specialist at CTRL and an adjunct faculty in the School of Education.
Thanks, Hannah. So we'll start today with just some guidelines for participation. If you all have been in our CTRL workshops previously, you will likely recognize a lot of these. So Hannah, if you could go to the next slide. So for this workshop, we'll ask that you be present and participate in activities in a way that works for you. You know yourself best and you know what you need today to get the most out of this session. So we invite you to participate in a way that you think is useful for you. We'll ask you all to ask questions and share ideas in the chat. We have quite a few CTRL folks here, and we can make sure to answer any questions or respond to any comments that you all have in the chat. So feel free to use that as you would like. We'll also ask you to use that raise hand function if you'd like to speak, or if we ask for responses, that is under the reactions tab. And then you just click that raise hand and we'll know that you're raising your hand. And then finally, be generous with your knowledge and respectful of other folks' knowledge. We also have some outcomes for the session. So hopefully by this end of this workshop, you'll be able to describe the value of building relationships with your students, identify a variety of evidence-based strategies that you can use to connect with your students, both inside class and outside of class. And then finally, think about ways to revise your approach to office hours that can increase opportunities for connection with your students. So with that, we have a quick outline so you kind of know what to expect for today. So we're kind of going in like a hourglass type shape. So what we're going to talk about is the benefits of and uses of office hours first, and then we'll kind of pivot a little bit into talking about the importance of relationships and strategies that we can use to promote relationships. And then we'll kind of circle back to talking again about office hours, why there are some barriers to office hour attendance for a variety of our students, and then talking about those strategies that we can use to promote office hour attendance. So you'll have two opportunities to get a lot of strategies from us throughout this workshop today. So hopefully that will be useful for you. What we're going to start with first is a quick warm-up chat. So in that chat, introduce yourself, your department, and share what do you think office hours are for. And you can come at this either from your perspective or what you think students might answer, to see if we can get a variety of responses as to, what are office hours, right? Because the name is a little like, what does that actually mean? What are office hours and what do we use them for? All right, and we've got a response from Allie, who is from the Department of Government, stating that office hours are for students to come and chat with me, ask questions that go beyond classroom material, or clarify classroom material or assignments. I think that's likely a very common response and a common thread that we'll see through what a lot of other folks are using office hours for. So I appreciate that response. Thanks, Allie. So more responses similar. Evan's talking about having students get help with class material, general advice, insight about career issues or future plans. Academic coaching doesn't have office hours, but helping illuminate why students might go to those office hours. I love that you share that with your students, Amanda, and help them learn why they should go to office hours, because a lot of times instructors don't always communicate that to them. So hopefully today we'll be able to help you all communicate to students why they would actually want to come to these office hours. available for anything they need inside and outside of the course, helping with class material and other types of advice, go deeper into material or projects that are kind of outside of that class, that really the basic course content that you're covering in your class. Yeah, so this is great. Thank you all for sharing. And I think these are all very common uses of office hours that a lot of folks will recognize, or that at least that a lot of professors will recognize. But I'll note that some of those things that you all brought up are not things that students necessarily think about. And that transitions really nicely into our just a quick slide that we have about benefits and uses of office hours. Actually, I forgot to share our slides with you so you all have access to these resources. So let me do that real quick. So they're in the chat, right? They'll come through in the chat in just a sec once they've uploaded, but then you'll be able to access any of the references that we've shared on these slides. Okay, so back to the content. So like a lot of you said, students and instructors both have highlighted the value of office hours for content clarification, assessment follow-ups, practicing with content, really getting deeper into that content during those office hours. What I'll note though, is that students had kind of a more limited view of the benefits of office hours. They didn't always recognize all of the things that instructors would share, such as using it for career advice. Very few students recognized that career advice was something they could ask their professors for in office hours. Students also had trouble recognizing that they may use it to develop relationships with their professors. Only about 5% of the respondents from this survey, and this was done with a variety of STEM courses at a relatively large undergraduate institution, but they asked the students, and the students did not recognize that they could use these office hours to build relationships both with their instructor and also with other students. So we may need to highlight to students that all of these different uses that they can have for office hours and reasons why they may want to come. So like that last bullet point notes, professors note that relationship building, promoting an inclusive community, and those ideas about working thinking about the advice that we may be able to give to our students about grad school, internships, different types of applications they may be doing. Students don't recognize that they can use office hours for those purposes. So we need to highlight that to our students and help them learn that that's something that they can use these office hours for. And then finally, this idea of relationship building, right? So how do we use our office hours and our expertise to help us foster relationships with students? And how do we communicate this value of any relationship they might develop with us to them? How do we get this across to them? And at this point, I'll pass it over to Hannah to talk about the value of relationships. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to either raise your hand right now or put them in the chat.
All right, so as Mac noted, when we went over the agenda for today, we were going to start with office hours and now kind of move more big picture and thinking about the importance of relationships in general, and kind of even going beyond this idea of office hours, just why is it so important to build relationships with our students and build connections with them. So here we kind of summarize one model for how we might think about the impact and importance of relationships. So this is based on lots of literature in higher education classrooms and other learning spaces, essentially in that both learning outcomes and commitment to an institution and retention at an institution are tied to the quality of relationships that students have with both faculty and staff. And this box in the middle kind of answers the question of why. So quality relationships, connections, and mentorship all lead to greater student motivation, greater student buy-in, greater trust, respect, sense of belonging, all of these things that we know then lead to greater learning outcomes and greater commitment and retention. Research also shows that the biggest difference for a student is actually between having 0 quality relationships and having 1 quality relationship. So ideally, students have a network or a constellation of mentors, and that sweet spot is from 5 to 10 faculty or staff that they really feel a connection with. But just having 1 faculty or staff member on campus that you have a relationship with can really influence students' outcomes. And then when we use this word quality, what we'll talk about throughout this workshop is that doesn't have to mean long-term. That doesn't have to mean very time consuming. It's more about the importance. So there's this term kind of like that fleeting but important relationship. Students just feeling like you see them, you notice them, you're connected with them. A lot of this can even happen in class or with few moments outside of class. So this doesn't necessarily have to mean, those ongoing year-long or multi-year research mentorships that you might see in a research lab or something, but just those quality connections that might happen in just small moments of time. So we also want to share some perspectives from students throughout this workshop. So I was very fortunate to be able to teach a wonderful group of students in a psychology of education course last semester, where we talk about a lot of these things from the education and the teacher perspective, but also them being students can speak to the student perspective as well. So when we talked about this idea of trust and respect in learning spaces, I asked them to share their ideas about what is involved in building and earning students' trust and respect, and connecting that to what we were learning in the course. So students answered things like finding balance between fun and order, flexibility and accommodation, transparency and expectations, taking time to get to know students as individuals, all these things affecting motivation, participation, and success in class, improving the quality of work. And the more students enjoy being in class, the better they're learning. So really, these students are summarizing a lot of what we see in the literature over and over again. But I think something really important to take note of is this idea of they too recognize that balance between fun and order, or that balance between, say, friendly relationships and respecting still the professionalism of us being faculty or staff, and that they recognize there's a balance there as well. This connects to this other idea of kind of the importance of relationships being mutually beneficial. So the more teachers are committed to building relationships with their students, the more students will be committed to feeding back into that relationship, and that the more we give, the more we will receive. The more we build trust and respect with our students, the more they'll trust and respect us. Buy-in increases, and ideally, it's a positively reinforcing relationship. And then a few more insights from the student perspective, asking this slightly different but related question: in the ideal learning environment, how might you describe the teacher-student relationship? These students wrote that the teacher-student relationship ideally is supportive and respectful. It's mutual, and that teachers and students are learning from each other, that the teacher is a mentor to students, that it extends beyond the classroom, caring, trusting, understanding with high expectations, and that both teachers and students genuinely care about each other. And I think that means as whole people, right, that we're bringing our whole selves to the learning. Also, making note of this comment specifically with high expectations, and that building relationships, connecting with our students doesn't have to mean we're making things easy, doesn't have to mean we're making things, we often hear this idea of, is this hand holding, or is this and giving them too much guidance? But I think there's a way to do this in a way that still holds students to very high expectations and a rigorous learning experience. So that leads us into now kind of hearing from the student perspective, also connecting this back to the literature on relationships in education. These principles we present here come from the book Relationship Rich Education by Felton and Lambert. The 4 principles being: all students must experience genuine welcome and deep care, that relationships inspire all students to learn and drive motivation, all students must develop webs of significant relationships in college, and that all students need meaningful relationships to help them and to challenge them to explore the big questions of their lives. So with that, we argue and want you to think about throughout this workshop that relationships are key to those rigorous, meaningful learning experiences, that it's not relationships or rigor, but it's relationships lead to rigor. And that something else to note is that we don't need immense resources nor specializations in counseling necessarily to create those high expectations and high support opportunities. So it's just thinking about how the classroom experience and things related to the learning that's going on in the classroom can still provide opportunities for connection, and how we're organizing our courses and our syllabi and our coursework and activities, learning activities and programs around relationships rather than around just the content or the discipline that we might be teaching. So with all of that as a framework, we want to provide some specific strategies that you might think about to promote relationships and connect with students, many of which you might already be doing. And this is a great chance to reflect on what you're already doing, or also considering what you might add or enhance. So certainly just knowing and using students' names and pronouncing them in the way that they prefer, using pronouns, especially if students are sharing those with you, greeting and welcoming students as they come into class, recognizing things that might have changed, a new sticker on their water bottle, a new, I'm not sure what else, but I'm noticing, for example, a student of mine came into class and had a really beautiful laptop case. And so that just kind of sparked a conversation. I asked her where she got it. She said her sister had actually painted it for her and gave it to her for Christmas. So that really led to a great conversation that took 30 seconds while students were working on some other task in class, that I think that student just really felt recognized and seen in that moment. Starting class with warm-up questions. So especially as students are transitioning into a class, they're coming from another class or another commitment on campus, or just having woken up or gotten started with their day, starting class with a moment to transition into the course, whether it's a warm-up question about course content or something that might be a little bit more oriented around social or personal things, gives students a chance to kind of get settled in and feel a sense of connection to you and their fellow students. Developing collaborative norms and values with students, something that can be especially valuable towards the start of the semester, or as you move into, say, doing more discussions in class or wanting to work through setting up what are those expectations for how you're going to interact with each other, and giving students a say in how the class is run, or the types of either policies or procedures or guidelines that you're following. Making time for chit chat before, during, and after class is kind of all related to these things. Asking students, as much as it makes sense, to connect the course content to their personal or lived experience, and learning about them through course content. And then sharing power with students, giving students agency and choice. So I will pause here before we transition back into office hours, which is our last strategy, getting students to come to office hours, to see if there are any comments or follow-up questions on either any of these strategies or some of these frameworks that we presented. Or if someone who has done some of these things has a personal anecdote or story to share about what's really worked well for you in relation to promoting relationships. Ali, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. These are all great ideas. Just on the first one, and knowing and using students' names, I always struggled, especially in bigger classes, to learn all the students' names. But last semester, I actually got a tip from the professor that was in my classroom just before me. And I noticed that he had name tents. So I asked how he did that, or how he used them rather. And I've adopted his same strategy, which is essentially students make name tents right at the beginning of the semester. And then students, when they come in, and he brings them, each class session. And when students come in, they pick up their name tents. And so then the name tents are in front of the students, right? So it's helpful to remember their names. And he also uses that as a way to keep attendance, right? And so students that return their name tents at the end of the class session, those are the students that were present in class that day. And so this solved two problems: one, trying to learn my students' names, and then two, figuring out like how to possibly keep track of the 35 kids, some of which would come in late, and I'm like mid lecture or whatever. And so that was a really great idea, and I've adopted it this semester, and I'm doing it again, and I really like it.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. And I see Michael in the chat also uses name tents, and there might be some others. I'm a huge fan of name tents. That's actually my warm up on the first day of class, is to decorate your name tent. And what I found is also encouraging them to say drawing a little icon or something that represents them also helps you get to know them. So I remember like Danae is the one who drew the paintbrush, and Lila's the one with the plant, and who's the one with the cat, and can start also spark conversation. And another idea I've gotten from another faculty member was to, throughout the semester, having students write things inside their name tents too, say like mid-semester, having them reflect on just major takeaways from the course or things they're proud of that they've accomplished in the course. And then they have their name tent at the end of the semester as like this mini kind of journaling exercise or as an artifact from the course. I see Noemi, you would raise your hand. You have something to add here.
It was about that I also heard that from a colleague, right? Saying how they use the tents for students to express any kind of thought, even emotions. I saw someone saying they use it for students to write each other messages so that they can interact with each other in that way too, right? Writing something, maybe an appreciation for that student that day, some kind of emotion or comment for them.
I love that. Yeah, certainly acknowledgements and appreciation can go a long ways. Oh yeah, and Jenny's recognizing Blackboard had photos and Canvas doesn't necessarily. Shed recognizing could vote using tents. Like the site, flipping it if they need a break from participation. Love that. I've also used name tents for getting students into different groupings. So usually allowing them to choose where they sit, but some days we'll start by sitting somewhere different. So you can talk to some different people for a change, moving them around. Yeah, so great ideas. Continue to interact and share in the chat, but I'm gonna turn it back over to Mac to get us back into thinking about office hours and our barriers and strategies there. Oh, Allie, how does asking them to sit in different spots? Do you mean, are they kind of not really into it, or?
Yeah, that's what I mean. I'm considering doing that because, of course, they've all now picked the spot in the classroom where they want to be, and like I'm sure they'll never move if I don't actually, try something different.
Yeah, I think like anything, when you're trying something new, just being very transparent about the benefits and the value of why you're doing it. So try not to pose it as, I need to mix you up, but I'm giving you an opportunity to meet some new classmates, to talk to some different voices, to hear from different voices, do a lot of turn and talk, and there's value in you hearing from some different people. And don't worry, you'll be able to choose your seat again next time. This is just, we'll do this once in a while to mix you up, sort of thing. So, and when I've been very transparent about that, they're usually pretty accepting. And then I've also, let students know if you have a specific spot, or I think before I go ahead and do that, I say, next class, I'm going to mix us up. Please send me a private message or talk to me after class if you have a specific spot you need or want to sit, because I do have students with visual impairments who need to sit closer to the front, or hearing impairments. So being aware of accessibility before kind of enforcing that students sit in a different place is important too. Yeah, so I'll go back to Mac.
Great. Thanks, Hannah. And I love that note about ensuring that the folks that need certain things right within the classroom still have those, even if we're moving them around or having them do various activities. I think that's really, really key. Okay, great. So let's do some more interaction. So what we're going to ask you all now is to really think about that last bullet point from Hannah's slide, which is So why don't students come to office hours, right? So the name of the session is why don't students come to office hours? So what we're going to ask you to do is on this Jamboard that I just put into the chat, share some of your ideas as to why students come to office hours. This could be stuff that you experienced when you were going through the schooling process, things that you hear your students share, things that you've heard from other folks, things that you're just thinking about. We're excited to hear really anything that you might have come up with as to why students struggle to come to office hours. And I'll give you a few minutes to start populating the Jamboard, and then we'll discuss it.
And I'll just share the Jamboards for those of you who might be new to Jamboard.
Thanks.
You can use the sticky note icon is right here. So if you click on that, you'll be able to type your response. You could change the color if you want. And then once you save it, it'll show up on the board. So everyone can interact with this individually and add your own ideas.
Right. So it looks like we're starting to get some responses, and also a lot of them are, I think, sitting around a few different themes. So we started to try and kind of group them based on those themes. So the first one that I'm noting is that this like idea of intimidation, right? So students may not feel comfortable with the professor, with meeting with a professor one-on-one for a variety of reasons. Students may be like worried about telling a professor that they're struggling. It may not be something that they've ever done before. They're like, I don't want the professor to think I'm stupid. I'm trying really hard, but I'm still struggling. And they have difficulty, reaching out and asking for that help. A second theme that I'm seeing is that there's this idea of like busyness. Folks have a lot on their plates, either on the professor side or on the student side. So it can be hard to see that immediate benefit of office hours if you're so busy that you're like, well, I'm not really going to get anything out of it, so I'm going to go ahead and not go. This could be something that maybe students are coming in with, this idea that office hours may not be beneficial to them because in the past, that's been their experience with them, right? They may not have had professors that were as helpful, or they may have been burned kind of by attending office hours in the past. So they're coming in with those assumptions when they come into your class, where it is a fantastic idea to come to office hours. They just don't know that yet. This idea that coming to office hours is an imposition on faculty. I think that's a big thing that I've heard students talk about, and something that I kind of felt like, oh, my question is not important enough. Other people have more of a need to come to office hours. I don't really need the help, and my professor's super busy and I don't want to bother them. So I think that's a common thing that we hear students say, that they don't want to take up too much of the professor's time. They may just forget that you have office hours or when you hold them. Absolutely, we all forget lots of stuff, right? So reminding them of when your office hours are at various times throughout the semester could be a great way to help them remember when office hours occur. And then this idea, I think, of if you don't have a question or a specific reason for coming to office hours, why would you come? So again, that idea of what are the benefits to office hours outside of just simply content clarification or asking a question of your professor. Hannah, are you seeing anything that you want to pull out?
I think you covered it all, but yeah, a lot of themes around anxiety, intimidation, fear, judgment, discomfort. So all these kind of negative emotional responses that we want to work on, kind of reframing and putting a more positive spin on this, for presenting it in for the opportunities that they offer.
Absolutely. All right, so we've brainstormed some of these barriers, and then we're gonna switch back to our PowerPoint and talk about some other barriers that the research shows us. A lot of these are things that you all came up with. So there are lots of barriers to office hour attendance. So students and professors, this is from that same research study that we highlighted before. Both students and professors noted that not having questions as well as schedule conflicts are main reasons why they or their students don't attend office hours. So I think a lot of folks highlighted that in our Jamboard. Students also noted that they were intimidated by office hours, had previous negative experiences when attending office hours, or saw no benefit to attending. I think these are also all things that you all noticed and recognized and put on that Jamboard. So what this tells us is that we really need to help students understand the value of office hours and why it's beneficial to attend them, even without a question, right? So it helps us know that students may have been kind of burned in the past when attending office hours with professors. They may have been shamed for the types of questions they were asking. They may have, felt anxiety around attending and then had that anxiety actually come to fruition by the way that they interacted with their professor. So we may need to do some trust building with them to help them see that we are here to help and that we're not going to shame them for any of their confusion or their questions that they have, right? So if they're intimidated by office hours, we need to show them both through directly telling them, hey, I'm happy to help you in any way possible, but also by the way that we interact with them and build those relationships in class. Like Hannah was talking about, that trust and that relationship building help them to learn, hey, this professor's not going to be mean to me when I come in with what I think may be a stupid question. So we have to explicitly state that to our students and help them understand that, we are here to help. We're not here to shame them if they don't understand a concept. I'll also note that both professors and students noted that this idea of a lack of effort was a reason to not attend office hours, but professors ranked this idea of a lack of effort as a much higher barrier than students. So about 30% of professors said that students don't come to office hours because they don't care or they don't care about the course. And only about 5% of students recognize that. So students have a lot going on in their lives, right? We, professors, faculty, have a lot going on in their lives, and so do students, right? So they may have other jobs, they may have caring responsibilities, internships. Most of them are taking 4 or 5 other courses. So it's really important not to take it personally when students can't come to office hours, and not to assume that they just don't care. They may have competing priorities and have to be able to manage those competing priorities. And if we as instructors have not highlighted to them the benefits and the value of attending office hours, they won't be able to prioritize that as something that they want to go to. There are also some other, I think, barriers that students may encounter as they're trying to think about attending office hours. And we highlighted some of these as well. So there's a lot of stigma around attending office hours. Some students may hold this belief that they're only for students who are struggling, right? Students have to recognize that they're struggling and be comfortable admitting it, which is a lot of difficulty for a lot of people. I think a lot of AU students come in having been maybe the top in their class, and this is the first time that they've been around a bunch of people that are also coming from being the top in their class in high school. And we have to communicate to them that it's okay to struggle, it's expected that you will struggle, and we as instructors are here to help. Students may also not feel entitled to your time, right? A few people mentioned that on our Jamboard. Maybe you've heard students say things like, my question isn't important enough, and I want students to have time to ask theirs. Or my instructor's so busy, they're an adjunct and they're working at 7 other schools, and I don't want to impose on them. But we have to highlight and let students know that they're not doing that. We have to explicitly state to them that it is okay to come to office hours. This is my time when I'm here to help you, and I want to help you. I want to use these office hours to help you learn the course content. The environment that you hold office hours in can also pose a challenge to folks. So could there be lots of people around that might hear a stupid question? And I'll note that I'm using air quotes around the term stupid question. So might they feel anxious that someone else might hear their question and not want to be in kind of a public place? Is it possible that it's hard to hear in the location that you're holding office hours? So students may not be able to hear you and may not be able to kind of think when a lot of noises are going around. Is your office accessible, right? Lots of buildings on AU's campus are not accessible. For example, Hearst, the building that CTRL is held in, does not have an elevator, right? So if you have a student who needs an elevator to attend your office hours, they would not be able to get there. Is it difficult to get to your office? There are a variety of locations on campus that instructors' offices are in that are actually really hard to get to. Like some of the offices in the Sports Center Annex complex, right? That's out of the way for students. It's not a place where they typically go, and they may not be able to get to your office hours at a time when they're being held. So when we're thinking about how to hold office hours and where to hold them, thinking about these questions can be helpful for helping make sure that we're holding our office hours in an area that is conducive to interacting with students. Also note that Shed mentioned that students might be nervous asking a question in the main language of the course. Exactly. So there are students we have students who come from a variety of backgrounds, and not all of them are as comfortable with using the English language or whatever language the course is taught in. They may be uncomfortable using that language and, again, kind of feeling stupid or feeling like they're unable to communicate properly. And I'll just note that these ideas of stigma and entitlement are most likely to affect our most marginalized students. So addressing these barriers can be really helpful in incorporating and ensuring that we're reaching all of our students, especially those who are most marginalized. Okay, so we talked a lot about barriers, right? And we definitely don't want to leave you with just barriers. So let's talk about some strategies that we can use to overcome these barriers. So one, which I think has probably come through with a lot of the things that both Hannah and I have said, is promoting transparency. So we have to explicitly discuss and name to students the norms of office hours. So this can be things like the uses. So what can they use them for? They can use them for content clarification, but they can also use them to ask us advice about their career path, or maybe a job that they're interested in applying to, or asking about different opportunities that are in the field that they may not know about. So we have to tell them, you can use office hours for all of these things. It can also be helpful to note the expectations for office hours. So what this means is how students interact in office hours, what to expect when they come up to your office. Should they just knock on the door and come right in? Will your office door be open? How do they navigate those kind of social norms around attending office hours? This is especially helpful for any anxious, nervous, or neurodivergent students who need to know what's expected of them in order to actively participate in these office hours. You might also consider renaming office hours. Like I stated kind of at the beginning, a lot of folks don't, it's not an intuitive name. There's a portion of Anthony Abram Jack's book, The Privileged Poor, where he talks about students who don't recognize that office hours are a time for them to come to talk to the professor. They think that it's a time when the professor's in their office working on office related things. So they're working on their lectures or their research. And that name office hours doesn't necessarily highlight to them that it is something when they're allowed to come and talk to their instructors. So there are lots of different ideas that you can use to rename those office hours in a way that makes it more apparent what they're used for. And I'll note that Scott mentioned in the chat that they use the term student hangout hours, right? That highlights them exactly what they're supposed to be doing and exactly that it is a key that is for students to gather information and help. Another thing that we noted as barriers to attending office hours is that there's a lot of outstanding obligations, right? So it can be hard to schedule them properly. So a few options that you have are polling students for their availability, maybe at the beginning of the semester, and then using those for your office hours. You can use Calendly or other scheduling managers to have, say, an hour worth of time where students can schedule time to talk with you. You can consider offering them both online and in person. I'll note that at CTRL, we've noticed that offering things online with an in-person option really increases engagement and folks' ability to participate because you don't necessarily have to be on campus in order to participate. And then you might consider just offering office hours by appointment. I noted this last because there's some divide, I think, within the educational development field as to if this is an accessible practice, right? So students may, if you have students that are having difficulty feeling entitled to coming to your office hours, offering them only by appointment makes it seem like you have to schedule a meeting with the professor, and that can be too high of a step. However, it can also be really helpful because if your students can't make the time that you've chosen, they have the ability to pick a time that works for them. So there's some competing interests there that to think about if you decide that that's a way that you want to go forward with your with scheduling your office hours. Some more strategies for overcoming these barriers. One thing that I think is really interesting is this idea of offering or suggesting required meetings with students. So I'll read this quote from Tracy Addy's book on what inclusive instructors do, which is, quote, scheduling extra time for required essential office hours for each individual student promotes equitable participation in the course and works to ensure all students have access to the same cultural capital in the classroom. So what this means is if we offer students or we tell students that they're required to come to a one-on-one meeting with us early in the semester, this lets them know kind of how office hours work, include or starts to develop some of that relationship building, lets them know that you're there to help them, and gives you the chance to kind of highlight, get an idea of what each student is, who each student is. And it can help overcome that idea of students not feeling entitled, right? Because you're requiring them to schedule this meeting so they know, okay, this is a time when I can come talk to you. You can also ask your students, right? So ask students explicitly, why don't you come to office hours? What can I do to make these more helpful or useful for you? And you can adjust the practices that you use based on your students' answers. You can also revise your general approach to office hours, right? So consider having them at different locations, different times of the day, different days of the week. Could also consider doing topic-based sessions. So what this means is you could have a session on career advice, right? So highlighting again to students that they can come to you for that career advice, that they can come to you with any of the questions that they have, because it's a specific time when they can come talk about that. So these are all a bunch of ideas and a bunch of thoughts and a lot of different strategies. They're not all going to work for everybody, and you're not going to want to implement all of them in your course. But what we want to do now is kind of give you a chance to mull over a lot of this information and maybe revisit your approach to office hours. So I will hand it over to Hannah to introduce what we're going to do next. but maybe I should pause and see if anyone has questions. I think we got most of.
Mac,
Scott just noted.
I don't
Go
have
ahead.
a question, but one thing I do is, aside from the name Student Hangout Hours and the location not always being my office, is on the next class, I ask, hey, everyone who hung out after last class, raise your hand. And then we talk about in front of the whole class what we talked about. And most of the time, it's not about assignments or not about class. It's about where they're from or a common roommate. So they see it's more of an open-ended conversation and not just a transactional, I'm having a problem with this assignment. It's truly an open-ended conversation.
Oh, I love that. I love that, Scott. That's great. And that's another way of highlighting to them all of the different uses, right? Because you're having other students share what you
Right.
talked about. So then they know, hey, this is what we're going to talk about. It's just a chill time to go hang out with Professor Talon, and we're gonna all work through it together. I think that's fantastic. All right. Any other thoughts, comments, things that you've done that have worked that you would like to share with the group? Shed noting in the chat that if more than one student comes at once, they can help teach each other about different concepts that might have been missed or work together on a question. Yeah, exactly. So sometimes students will use office hours as a way to, find like a study group. Some of the research suggests that students see that as a benefit to office hour attendance, just building connections again. So this again highlights that value of building relationships with students, both between the instructor and the students, but also between student to student. All right, I think Hannah, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. So we're now going to give you a chance to talk in smaller groups about some of these things. So like Scott has already started to do here, sharing some of the things that have or have not worked for you in the past, and thinking about all these different strategies that we presented in terms of timing, location, naming, how we're communicating these expectations or these norms around office hours. So we gave you a bunch of questions that could guide your discussion here, but really giving you a chance to brainstorm with your colleagues about what you might do to approach office hours here. So I think Mac is going to open some breakout rooms, and then we'll come back together in about 10 minutes to go over some key takeaways. And I will put some. Mac has everything in the chat.
All right, and we are ready to go. So I will go ahead and open those rooms now.
All right, welcome back from your small group discussions. We are interested in hearing, especially since it's a relatively small group here, it seems like it's a good sign when we close the rooms and people don't come back. So we're assuming there was a lot of good conversation going on in there, and would love to hear what some of you all are talking about. If you got, say, a new idea from a colleague that you'd like to share with others who weren't in your group, or any additional questions or concerns that came up, feel free to add to the chat or raise your hand. Giving people time to think, and that's okay. There's nothing else to share. I see Josh.
Yeah, let's see, lower hand. So Tori and I were talking, and one of the things that had never occurred to me before was just kind of even though in my classes, students I think are pretty comfortable, right? There's a lot of rapport and so on and so forth. It's a bit different when you think about coming to an office hour by yourself, right? Because there's safety in numbers in the class. But when you come to whatever you want to call it, if you don't call it, even if you don't call it an office hour. So maybe one of the ideas could be just, again, encouraging people to come with a friend, you know, because it could just be a fun thing to say too, as part of the sort of taking the, you know, the sort of maybe fears and the onus of office hours are only for this or that. They can also be done in a way that's comfortable for you. You know, they could be done, as you said, online. They could be done in person. They could be done with video. They could be done without it. And maybe taking the level of intimidation down in those ways.
Yeah, I love that idea and that point. It's a very important point that, yes, even if you have great relationships and connections with students in class, this is still something very different and sort of separate from class, or they might see it that way. So love that idea of encouraging small group or paired attendance at office hours. Any other ideas before we wrap up with some of our key takeaways? All right, so yeah, and a lot of these themes came up throughout the session, but we like to end our workshops and presentations with some key takeaways for you to reflect on and continue to think about as you move on with your day and your week. The first one being, we don't need immense resources or specializations to create these supportive and welcoming learning environments. We, don't mean to communicate that we all need to take on an extra burden or an extra time commitment necessarily, but that just using the time that we have with students, the time we've already dedicated to office hours, what can we do to make them more inviting, more welcoming, more effective and useful and beneficial for us and our students. The second key point is that being friendly and human, connecting with students and fostering relationships provides that leverage for higher expectations and more rigorous and meaningful learning. So reiterating that at point that those aren't two different things and they're not in contrast with each other, but they actually reinforce each other. And that this is our way to push students and challenge students to grow and to learn. And that if we organize our courses and our office hours around relationships rather than around content, we all benefit from that. So with that, I see Lindsay added into the chat the very brief feedback survey that Mac and I both value your feedback tremendously, as does CTRL overall, so that we can make decisions about programming and know what went well for you in this session. And we're also interested, if you'd feel comfortable sharing in the chat, just a final reflection. What is one way you might revise your approach to office hours to increase opportunities for connection with students? So maybe something you're taking away from that breakout room discussion or any of the strategies we presented. What's really resonating with you right now? I guess feel free to share out loud too, if you'd like.
Gonna try to see what Scott suggested, which is in addition to renaming, is the trying to find time after class, immediately after class, to hang out. So what if that's possible? After class, like inviting them to go with me.
I've even
I mean,
taken
there's really
walks
short.
with each other. Oh, Mac, yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, those really short interactions that you have with students, either like right before class or right after, can also help you build those relationships, right? So it doesn't necessarily need to be in a separate space. It can just be in the 5-10 minutes after class when you're packing up and students are coming up and they're asking questions or whatever students are talking about. That can also be a time that you can use.
Mhm. And I think what I've heard from both faculty and students that since the pandemic and since all of that remote teaching, we moved away from being used to doing that, and that they, especially to our younger students or students who are new to campus, are still adjusting to that idea that, oh, I can get to class early and I can kind of connect with the professor that way, or it's okay to hang out after class. So just reiterating that sometimes we need to explicitly verbalize these norms that we might have sometimes take for granted or think that students understand, that they're maybe not actually that accustomed to. Well, thank you all very much for joining us for our first Spring 2023 Teaching and Learning Workshop. As a reminder, we're always here to talk more one-on-one with you all, so you can request a consult at any time. We have a bunch of upcoming events that are all up there on the calendar. Thank you, Lindsay, our program events coordinator, who's here for getting those all up and so that you can register, and we have plenty of resources to support you. So thank you again, and glad to see some familiar faces and some new faces.